Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I think you're well advanced in your research by now. So this seminar comes in great time. It's our great pleasure to have Raffaella Semendo, partner and head of sustainability at 2xideas, as our guest speaker today. Thank you to you, Raffaella, and thank you to 2xideas for supporting the research challenge. Raffaella is going to talk about the importance of ESG and how to integrate ESG assessments in analyzing companies. We are recording. This webinar recording will be made available to you today or tomorrow. Please note that this is for educational purposes only, so you should not share it with anyone else who is not participating in research challenge. If you have questions for Raffaella, please leave them in the Q&A box and we will get back to them at the end of presentation. Thank you very much, Raffaella. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much and welcome to the presentation on ESG integration in fundamental equity research. So we as 2xideas, we run a long-only quality growth mid-cap fund that is registered as an SFDR Article 8 fund. So we have ESG fully integrated in every step of our research and investment process. We are fundamental analysts, and at the same time, we leverage the potential offered by technology to aggregate the data we need for fundamental research and to build portfolios. So I will lead you through 4 points listed here on the agenda. Number 1, understand the importance of ESG. How does ESG impact investment cases? Some practical steps on how to integrate ESG into your analysis, and some resources for further learning and research. So let's get started with what is ESG. So environmental focuses on a company's impact on the planet, so the carbon emissions, resource depletion, waste management. Social addresses how a company manages relationships, labor practices, supply chain management, human capital development is very important. And the governance, which is actually the one that is sort of, I would say, the oldest of the 3 ESG metrics, involves company leadership, executive pay, audits, shareholder rights, and so on. Often, but not always, it is the case that governance drives also the E and the S. If you have very poor governance structures, it is also often the case that the E and the S are poorly led. One word on governance, but I will get back on that. Not everything that a rating agency proclaims as the gold standard on the corporate governance side fits every company. So it's also very much a cultural thing. So for example, founder-led companies often have dual roles, CEO chairman, which in the US is very normal, whereas rating agencies see that as a, let's say, little negative flag. So what I would like to do here is just be aware when you research, is it something that is actually standard because they rate through all companies, or is it something that you have to look at in specific? So maybe a governance structure that in the big picture might not look as best in class might be very good for a specific company. So for example, as I said, founder-led companies. Why is ESG important in finance? There is a global shift to an increasing emphasis on sustainability and responsible investing. The regulatory landscape is changing. It's changing a lot and it's changing fast, and somehow it doesn't stop yet. So regulations like the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation require transparency on ESG factors. Here, maybe to say they do not require the integrate, or not all parts require the integration of all ESG factors, but they require transparency on ESG factors. I think that's something important to mention. Now, investor demand is growing. Asset owners ask more and more for that investments consider ESG factors for long-term value, and it does become a little bit a bit more mainstream. It's a risk management tool. ESG factors can significantly impact a company's risk profile and financial performance. Now, when you conduct an ESG assessment, I think it's very important to go beyond compliance. And that's also what investors seek. So from companies, or expect from companies. Obviously, we have a lot of minimum standards out there, UN Global Compact, etc., basic human rights compliance. But I think it's very important to go beyond and ask more than just tick the box, yes, they have a certain accreditation or not. Now, ESG originated with an outside-in view on the company, so as a risk management tool. Nowadays, the inside-out view becomes more and more important. When you do research about a company, always think about the double materiality. And this is defined, I took the example of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. The concept of the double materiality means a disclosure is material if it is material from an impact perspective, so affecting employees, customers, vendors, environment, and a financial perspective, so affecting investors and creditors alike, or a combination of both. Now, define double materiality. I will not go into too much detail, but I have listed the link here, how the EFRAG defines it. And I have listed the link of the SASB standards and the materiality finder of SASB, which I think is extremely helpful in getting a first view when researching a company. What is actually a materiality for this industry, for this sector, for this company? Obviously, the companies themselves, some, not all yet, do a materiality analysis as well. And it helps you to compare and come to your own thoughts and conclusions. Now, there are different viewpoints. I will not go into too much details of this on this slide. Obviously, I do not stand behind all of them, especially not the contra ones, because I think ESG is very important, and I think sustainable practices do drive long-term value creation. But just be aware, or you maybe already are, that there's always a pro and a con, and it's also a little bit of a regional question, especially in the USA. But here are a couple of quotes and sayings about pro and cons of ESG integration. Now, it is not the right place and setting to discuss whether the development of new ESG regulations is positive or negative. But I wanted to show this map that the ESG momentum continues. This is a timeline since 2020 until today of different jurisdictions of where different type of ESG regulatory new regulations have been implemented. And you see it's not yet finished, it will continue. And it both affects all financial market participants, so both funds like us, but also the companies that are listed, and with CSRD also the non-listed ones. I'm a strong believer of what is being measured and transparently communicated will be managed. And if regulations urge companies and investment funds to be more transparent, I very much welcome the development. On the individual regulations, obviously, there's always room for discussion. Now, what are different approaches in ESG? And this slide a little bit focuses, I mean, you are analyzing or researching one single company. We build portfolios. And I think it's very important to keep these two aspects have an interconnection, but it's also important to see from what type of, or from what viewpoint do I look at the company. So different ESG approaches for research and portfolio constructions. I start with the most simple one, is the negative screening, exclusions. It's norms-based, values-based. It goes from very basic to very extensive, where, for example, all alcohol companies or GMO or fur or whatever is being excluded. The very basic one, for example, would be controversial weapons. For example, there's an association of Swiss pension funds that has a minimum exclusion list. And when you look at it, you will see it's quite basic. But that is also changing on different pension fund or asset owner levels. Then we have the approach of integration. In some cases, it's a thematic approach, but the integration, ESG integration, is a holistic integration of ESG factors to the investment strategy. So it's the research process for single stock picking. That's the one we do. We include ESG factors and looking at ESG metrics at every step of the investment or research process. And obviously, you can also do that if you have a thematic fund. There is a positive screening, a best-in-class approach. It means it's a systematic approach where you choose the X number of best companies within their industry or within their sector, and then build a portfolio out of that. And you can base that on proprietary research or proprietary scoring system, or you can base it on one or more, or a combination of providers' ratings. But this is a best-in-class approach. And then we have the impact-aligned and impact-generating approach. So you have the whole scope from high positive impact to very high positive impact. There are different ways to measure that. In the equity space, there are often Article 9 funds, and they're very often private equity funds. Now, they're different. Those words are not all of them are exactly defined. Some are defined by the EU regulation, but every jurisdiction sets different parameters. One that is used often by asset owners in the DACH region is from Eurosif, where they have a white paper where they classify those different approaches. So the EU has the SFDR, as I mentioned. Switzerland has a self-regulation. The UK has the SDR, and they're all very similar but different. Same but different. From an asset owner's perspective, with the EU Green Deal, the EU focuses or started off focusing on the environmental side, so also with the EU taxonomy. If you go to the US, the focus is in many cases very strongly on DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. A very short excursion to EU SFDR. So you have 3 levels in the fund space that you can register the funds as. So the Article 6 does not specifically promote environmental or social characteristics. An Article 8 fund that has social or environmental promotion targets, given good governance. Maybe I have to add Article 6, you do have to integrate ESG risks, but you have no promotion target. On Article 9s, have to have 100% of the fund, should it be invested in sustainable investments. And the reason I do this excursion is that in the EU, the term sustainable investment is very clearly defined by the SFDR Article 2.17. So as fund managers, we cannot just call something a sustainable investment if it is not according to Article 2.17. And I wanted to make you aware of that. Now, speaking about ESG ratings and data availability. So ESG ratings do have a purpose. They assess a company's exposure to environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities. They help investors score potential impacts on financial performance. ESG ratings often are supported by in-depth research, and they, for example, support our analysts to conduct research. They provide structured data for analyzing non-financial risks alongside traditional financial metrics. For investors with sustainability mandates, ratings help identify companies that align with ESG values and regulatory standards. This is more on the data side. So we, for example, pull data from an ESG rating provider to assess whether a company complies with the UN Global Compact or the Principle Adverse Impacts, etc. And you can also do the same with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and different SFDR metrics that are available. Now, what is important when looking at ESG ratings or when comparing them? They are unregulated still. There's a big change going on at the moment that they will become regulated at some point. There's a huge inconsistency across providers, so you very much have to look at the methodology. Some of them are industry adjusted, meaning that you can have a oil and gas company with a super good rating because within their industry, they're doing not as bad as the others. So always be aware or look at the methodology if they are industry weighted or not, if it's an absolute or not. Transparency and subjectivity is obviously a case. So you see, for example, on the two that I copied from Sustainalytics and MSCI, it says rating action date, last report update, and what it doesn't say there is last interaction date. Maybe you look at a company that has no interaction at all with the rating agency, and maybe they have a really bad rating, and there you might wonder, why do they have a bad rating? Why do they not interact with them? For companies, especially for smaller companies, small mid companies, sometimes it's a very big resource to interact with the rating agencies. And on the other hand, from the rating agencies, they are sometimes a little bit slower than we would like them to be due to the big workload. And so there's an inconsistency in terms of communication. And sometimes we have had the case where a company had a very poor ESG rating from the rating agency. And when we approached with an engagement, the company directly, they said, well, we've been trying to engage with them, but it just takes time to build up the score and build everything up. But we do have the processes and policies in place that would be needed for a better score. The same goes with controversies. ESG rating agencies assess controversies, and there is sometimes a lack in there. So what is also important, as I said, the lack in data and controversies, look at it very closely. Now, all of these are usually behind a paywall. Some ESG data providers have public online tool with some data available. They don't have all of the companies. I have put the link for MSCI and Sustainalytics. And obviously, when you have a peer analysis, you can see where does the peer group stand and do a comparison on that side. Now, a word on financial models. As mentioned, ESG-related risk and opportunities can impact financial performance. Therefore, tying in ESG considerations in your model via scenario analysis can be very helpful. I say scenario analysis because, and I will come to that later again, the time frame consideration is extremely important. So, for example, it can be done in different ways, and the ways that I've listed here are not all of them are suitable for every company or for every situation. And obviously, you don't have to take all of them, and you can also, and you choose what is best suitable. So I just thought I'd give you the whole array of options. So income statement, P&L, adjusting revenues, both production, operational costs, tax impacts, this can impact your income statement. On the balance sheet, adjusting asset valuations of both tangible and intangible assets, such as impairments, adding contingent liabilities, etc. The cash flow statement can be impacted on the operating cash flow, so changes in working capital, the investing cash flow, changes in CapEx, financing cash flow, issuance of equity and debt. Always think about green bonds and look at the structures of the green bonds very specifically. On the valuation side, you can adjust your discount rate, the WACC if you use a discounted cash flow. So the cost of equity can change, a risk premium adjustment by, for example, having a higher beta and CAPM for ESG laggards and vice versa. Cost of debt is very important, and also access to debt. Credit risk, ESG laggards may have higher future interest rates on debt due to increased perceived risks and vice versa. You can adjust forward multiples such as PE, EV, EBITDA, PB, depending on what the company sector you are dealing with. What is important to say, as I mentioned earlier on, when integrating the impact of ESG on financial models, they don't impact all of those points that I've listed here, and you have to really consider the time frame. So for example, a stranded asset impacts not within what, or a potentially stranded asset doesn't impact within 1 year, but maybe within 5-10 years. The same when you think about insurance companies with potential hurricanes and manufacturing sites that are built in hurricane close areas. They might not be impacted straight away, or they might be. So those are things, timeframes always have to be considered and taken in consideration, and adapted to the risk that is actually, or the opportunity, obviously. So for example, I mean, this I spoke a lot about risks, but it also goes into the other side. If you have a company investing a lot of R&D into a future product that could increase revenues and sales, then obviously it has a positive impact. So it goes in both ways. A word on Sustainable Development Goals. This is a framework for global challenges. They are 17 interconnected goals that address critical global challenges. It's a framework that can roughly also be broken down into the E, S, and G. They give guidance. They help identify and assess key ESG factors that may be material to a company's long-term performance. And they do align with global regulatory and market trends. Now, here again, there are two very important things. When using the SDG for the measurement of positive impact, and many companies actually report along the SDGs, always have a close look at the percentage of revenue that actually contributes to the specific SDG. Are there resources deployed, for example, R&D, to actively increase the positive impact, or is it solely a function of increased sale? And what's the interconnection of the two? Now, some of the SDGs cannot be addressed by companies, but they have to be addressed by governments and NGOs. Now, practical steps on how to actually do all that. Before we start, ESG is 15 points out of 100 in the grading of your report, and 10 out of 100 for the presentation. So manage your time accordingly. And I hope with this presentation, I can give you a little bit of toolbox on where to start. I have drawn a little bit of a flywheel of ESG integration into a research process, because I do think it is a circle, it is repeating, and it does not end when the investment decision has been made. But before we go into the details, when you start, always think about the following. What ESG aspects are specifically relevant for the company that I'm researching in terms of the sector and industry the company operates in? It's a very big difference if it's an industrials company with a lot of manufacturing sites all over the world, or if it's a cybersecurity company in one of the business towers in New York. What are the countries where the company's operations are located? Same spiel here. If they're only located, let's say, for example, in London and in New York, it's a very different type of ESG risks and risks than, for example, if it's a coffee production sourcing from Latin America and Africa, etc., or chocolate production, etc., etc. So what are the tasks the majority of the employees have to perform? Is this task dangerous? Are they adequately trained? Are there industry standards that the company has to adhere to or can adhere to? I always look at the ISO standards as well. I like to look at them to see how is the structure of that industry where the company operates in, and what are the resources needed for the production of the product. Is it again the cybersecurity or let's say data company in New York that has as a main resource the electricity that they use for their server, plus obviously the skilled workforce? Or do they have input products or resources they need that are scarce, that are production intensive, that are water intensive, that are dangerous? Have a very good look at that. And then last but not least, where do I best find the information? Now, the purpose of an ESG assessment is the risk assessment, identify ESG related risks that could affect financial performance. It's an impact assessment, measuring the positive contributions and the impacts of the company. As I said, this can be done with the EU taxonomy. There it's only on the environmental side. It can be done with the SDG. And a comprehensive ESG assessment considers both risks and positive impacts. So step one, understand the industry dynamics, understand common ESG challenges and regulatory environments in the industry and the countries the company is operating in. Business model analysis you for sure have already done, but identify areas where ESG issues are most likely to arise in the company's operations. Collect and analyze ESG data. Now, where do you get the data from? Obviously, first source is company disclosures. Sustainability reports, annual reports, CSR reports, and here my advice to you, actually read them and read them thoroughly. And the sustainability reports of the companies are usually very, very detailed, and I also advise you to read those of the peers, because then you get a feeling for what is more marketing strategy of the company and what are clear facts. Now, a very short excursion to integrated reporting. There are nice, colorful sustainability reports, but for many companies, as part of their financial reporting, you will find the integrated reporting, where they report a little bit more on numbers of or the data relevant for sustainability. Then obviously third-party ESG ratings, we have MSCI, Sustainalytics, S&P Global, Upright Project. There are a lot of smaller agencies upcoming that are building their ESG rating and know-how on a lot of data. You have pure data providers, Thomson Reuters, Refinitiv goes sort of a little bit in both areas, Bloomberg ESG data, etc. But there's also a lot of free academic resources, university libraries, public databases, industry reports, etc. And then qualitative data, company policies, look at the policies that they claim to have, management interviews, news article, industry experts, etc. Again, a word on data challenges, and I've mentioned it before. Ensure the data is accurate and relevant, and put it into context. Numbers without context can be misleading. Compare against industry benchmarks, especially also things like scope 1, 2, and 3 reportings. And always make sure that you compare the same years, because sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge, that certain data providers do mid-year update and then they didn't find the right data for 2023, so they just published to 2022, and then you end up comparing stuff that is not comparable, and that's when it starts to get a little bit difficult. So make sure to actually compare the right things with the right things, compare apples with apples, as they say. Step 3, available data sources and frameworks. There are a lot of common data sources and frameworks that you can look at. The SASB is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It's industry-specific standards, and I've mentioned it before for the double materiality analysis. SDG is impact data. Again, as a reminder, really when doing an SDG analysis or when looking at the data of what the company reports on SDG, see if they actually report it with a percentage of revenue, because it's very easy to claim to support XYZ sustainable development goal without actually allocating a number or a percentage of revenue or a percentage of resource to it. Because if you don't have that, you cannot compare year to year. So for example, if you have a year 2022 and they report SDG so and so much of revenues, you can actually compare their progress, hopefully it's a progress, to the year 2023. Pie data, I will not go into detail on that one, but I have a link at the end of the presentation. Those are the principal adverse impact data. They come out of the EU Sustainable Finance Regulation. In European companies, you often find the data in sustainability reports. It's a set of around 20 data points, of which we as asset managers have to take in consideration 16. Actually, there are more than 20, but we have to take in consideration 16. And they're interesting. It gives you an idea where to start with, what to look at, because it's kind of something that is given by the regulator. Then you can Google GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. Obviously, that's linked with the integrated reporting. Does the company have a TCFD report? It's a report based focusing on climate risk. And I think that's a very insightful document, usually if they have one. Actually, Swiss companies will have to produce one, I think, next year. And to do a materiality or look at the different materiality maps, use tools like the SASB materiality map to identify relevant ESG issues. Now, that's already step 4. I have depicted a materiality map of Swiss Re there, and here again, the time frame is very important. Go along a standard or a framework. And also think about double materiality versus dynamic materiality. So dynamic materiality, double materiality is the impact on the company and on all stakeholders and on financial performance. And dynamic materiality are things that appear financially immaterial today, but they can quickly prove to be business critical tomorrow. So they move dynamically. And maybe they're not important today, but they pose a potential high risk for tomorrow. And always also consider reputational risk is a good example here. So you have something that could cause a reputational risk if X and Y happens in the company. It has not happened, but if it would happen, the impact would be fast and strong. Again, time frame consideration, I cannot say it enough. Think about short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts. So usually we categorize short-term, everything 1 to 3, 4 years. Medium-term is somewhere 4 to 7 years, and long-term is 7 years plus. Especially for also if you think about climate change risk and opportunities. Often industrials companies have also, obviously not all of them, but many industrial companies have a climate change or large climate change opportunities if they manage them well and if they invest in those opportunities. Now, step 5, you can create an ESG scorecard and or define ESG KPIs. If you do so, assign weights. So, for example, depending again on the industry or depending on the peers you put together, environmental could be 50%, social 30%, governance 20%. What is very important is look at the controversies. Does the company have open controversies or not? Is there positive impact? Where does the positive impact is being added into this scorecard? So, for example, on the environmental, there could be a low score due to high relative emissions and no mitigation measures from the company. A high score due to contribution to climate transition. Social, a low or moderate score due to weak labor practices. A high score due to strong company culture or employee development and human capital retention or development. Governance, you can give moderate or low score if there is not enough board diversity or the board is entrenched or not independent. Look at the cases very specifically. Again, I remember, please remember my example from the beginning. Or maybe it has a best-in-class corporate governance structure. What is very difficult to measure is how board accountability on ESG integration into operations. I always look if a, let's say, sustainability board, aside obviously the main the executive board, is there a sustainability committee? Is there someone within the board that takes accountability for sustainability topics, that has knowledge, that is building up knowledge, that is transferring knowledge, etc.? So that's one point from a ESG perspective where we look at the corporate governance. But obviously, corporate governance is a very broad topic. And at the end of the document, I have a link to ISS, that's a proxy advisor, to their voting policy, so that you, or different voting policies, that you have a little bit of a feeling of the do's and don'ts in terms of corporate governance. Controversies, again, assess if a controversy is still open. Is it concluded? Is the controversy maybe priced in or not yet? Are there still, often it's low cases, are there still problems or potential other outcomes to it? Have a very close look at them. And then obviously the positive impact, to what extent and in which areas does the company have a positive impact? What is the expected time frame for that? The incorporation of ESG into valuation models, you can adjust financials projections. Some examples, again, you increase operating costs due to anticipated carbon pricing. That's something that is not very widely done yet on the side of the company's reporting, that they actually put the carbon tax or internal carbon pricing into their financial models, but it is coming, and especially I think it's important for industrials company. Capital expenditure adjustments for investing in cleaner technologies, and for example, high physical risk exposure indicates a high potential loss from environmental risks if not mitigated. Now, the last 2 points, step 7, you have already done, can maybe do again, and I think it's my fiduciary duty to not stop here, but to go beyond the investment, because I think as sustainability integration has to be holistic, it has to be rounded off, it's a flywheel. So engage with the company management before, during, and after the investment, and industry experts. So a potential engagement outcome with management can help form your opinion. So for example, if a management acknowledges ESG risks but lacks concrete plans or limited commitment to source to deploy financial resources to, for example, reduce emissions intensity, it tells you quite a lot already. I mean, the positive other side is management acknowledges ESG risks and has clear mitigation plans in place with visible progress reports. And there I always like to see a plan transparently reported, and the year after transparently reported against the original plan. And I think what is transparent can be managed. Obviously, you can also and should engage with industry experts. So experts offer insight on whether the company's ESG efforts meet, exceed, or fall short of industry norms. Experts can also reveal potential risks or trends that management maybe overlooks, that you might have not yet thought about, and it can add depth to your assessment. Active ownership goes or doesn't stop there. It's you want to be invested hopefully for a long term. We look at good investments that we can stay invested a long time. So we want to engage with the companies, but we also want to bring our voice to the table. So proxy voting is extremely important. So we vote at every AGM and also at the EGMs. And when you do that, always think about, is a company's long-term ESG strategy aligned with long-term investment goals or your investment goals? So key takeaways, ESG integration is essential. It's no longer optional in an investment analysis from a risk perspective. Obviously, the impact perspective is, depending on the portfolio you want to build, maybe relevant or not relevant. I think it's very relevant. And I think it also gives opportunities and chances for future financial performance. Actionable insights matter. Move beyond symbols to actionable numbers and insights. And I think there the example of the SDGs is a very good example. The sustainability reports look very nice with all the colors and the photos and the SDG pictures or symbols, but actually go beyond that. Always think about, are targets credible? Is the company transparent? Is there a coherent strategy forward? And be proactive and bold. Use your insights to support strong investment recommendations. Now, at the end of the presentation, I will, there is a list of links, and I have put some examples of materiality assessments of Swiss companies that I think are well done. I have put the link of the ISS voting policies. Make sure to click on the tab special policies all the way to the right when you go on this website, because there are different types of voting policies depending on the investment focus. More sustainability, more SRI, more climate. You can also look at the differences of them and have a look at them to see what is generally expected in terms of corporate governance or best-in-class corporate governance, but adapted depending on your business case. So not everything that is in there fits the company that you're actually, or might not fit the company that you're actually researching. If you want to know more about the principal adverse impacts, I have linked the MSCI methodology about the principal adverse impacts. I think it's a public document, so I think it's very well described, and it has helped me a lot to understand the principal adverse impacts. And then I have linked the regulations, or the page where you find all the different regulations in its full length. And looking at CDP is also always a good thing if the company reports to CDP or chooses to report to CDP. If they don't, it might be interesting to find out why, and if they have plans to do so, and how they align their sustainability targets with not being transparent with CDP. So that maybe that could also be a question to management. And then I found this document, or I have this document, Just Transition is a topic that I have not covered in detail now. It's a specific approach in building portfolios where you actually invest in companies that are not there yet, but you kind of, instead of divestment and taking the money away from companies as let's say asset allocators or asset owners, you actually invest. You build your asset allocation, and you invest also in companies that are not so good yet today, but they have the measures and structures in place to contribute or to provide their contribution to a transition to net zero in the coming years. And I found this document from UNPRI extremely helpful. Last but not least, there's a overview of, it's a Bloomberg article that I also found very helpful, and it's a very simple overview of the different frameworks with the pros and the cons. That concludes my presentation. I hope I could give you an insight on step-by-step plan on how to go about, and whatever you criticize in my presentation skills, take it as a chance to do it better when you present. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Chef, for sharing your expertise. Appreciate it. Students, if you have questions, to also then ask questions. There are no questions.
No questions?
You did an excellent job. Cool kid.
I have a question. Sorry.
Okay, go.
Just let's say if we identified a material ESG issue, what is the approach to anyhow quantify it, to, let's say, reflect it in the working capital cost or anywhere else? I mean, there's not any standard yet. Or how can we encounter the issue to quantify it?
Well, as you say, there's no common standard, and every, let's say, asset manager that does integrate it does it slightly different. For example, I mean, if we, for example, integrate climate value at risk, we take a number or a pre-calculated number from a provider, and they have a time series yes, they actually have time series data, and we can integrate it, the result from an externally calculated resource. If you encounter something yourself, it's assumptions. But be aware, except for high risk stuff or extremely at stranded assets or a coal mine or whatever, the impact is not, it's kind of difficult to say not huge, but just justify why you adjust your income statement, balance sheet, or cash flow statement with the number X. And if you obviously do it to one company and you run a peer analysis, you obviously also have to do it for another company, depending if they face the same issue. So that's what my example was with the controversies, that if a company has a controversy, often it's already priced in. So, for example, lawsuits are priced in, or they have a how do you say, savings to cover that, and it's priced in. So it's a little bit at your own discretion, but be consistent and be able to justify it. Explain why. If you take, I don't know, 3% lower because, then justify why how you came to those 3%. I hope that answers the question.
That helped very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a question from Leah. With regards to peers, what ones for ESG?
I don't hear you. Hang on, I try to open the question as I don't hear you.
Now?
1 second. With regards to what are some criteria in picking up?
Can you hear me? What criteria in picking?
I'm reading it. 1 second. Yes, that's a very good question. I mean, I would say you build your peer group based on the business model, based on the industry and the sector of the company. And then if some of the peers don't have an ESG rating, you have to deal kind of with it and see, is there certain information that I can find myself? Is there certain information that I can calculate myself? But I would not amend your peer group depending on data availability. I would rather challenge the data availability. Now, next, oh no, that was the only question. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Maybe I can add to the peer group thing. What you could always do is expand the peer group and into a certain direction. Let's say you take you have your peer group, which you use also for your financial analysis and for the whole case. But because of lack of ESG data, you add, I don't know, 2, 3, 5, I don't know, companies for that purpose, but always be aware of the limitations and be aware that they might be not in exact same industry and hence have different exposures. Just always question what you read.
I think that's a great advice. Any other questions? If not, as said, we will share the slides from today's presentation, also the recording with you today or tomorrow. Thank you very much to Raffaella for joining us.
Thank you very much. And good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.